What happened 3 nights ago in the skies over the Persian Gulf will be studied in military academies for the next 50 years, and most people watching this video have no idea it even occurred. In the span of 72 hours, Iran conducted a weapons test that fundamentally alters the strategic equation in the Middle East, and the Western defense establishment is currently in emergency consultations trying to process implications that have no comfortable answer. Let me be very clear about what we are discussing tonight. This is not another missile test. This is not another drone demonstration. What Iran tested represents the single most destabilizing weapons capability in the history of modern warfare, and it works. The test was successful. The technology is validated, and Israel's entire defensive architecture, every system that the United States and Israel have spent 40 years and $200 billion building, becomes functionally irrelevant the moment this weapon is deployed at scale. I am going to take you inside every dimension of this moment. How does an electromagnetic pulse weapon actually function, and why does it represent a category of threat that Iron Dome was never designed to counter? What does the test data tell us about Iranian capability and timeline for operational deployment? And most critically, what does Israel do when it faces an adversary that can potentially eliminate its entire electrical infrastructure, its communications network, and its command and control systems in a single coordinated strike lasting less than 3 minutes? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but the truth, however brutal, is the only thing worth discussing. 3 questions will structure everything that follows, and by the end of this analysis, you will understand why the rules of Middle Eastern conflict just changed in ways that have no historical precedent and no established response protocol. Section 1, Technical Exposition, the Physics of Civilizational Collapse. Let me explain exactly what an electromagnetic pulse weapon is and why it represents something categorically different from conventional military technology. An EMP device generates a massive burst of electromagnetic radiation that propagates outward in all directions at the speed of light. When this electromagnetic wave encounters electronic systems, it induces voltage surges in conductive materials, including electrical wiring, circuit boards, transformers, and data transmission lines. These surges overwhelm protective systems and permanently destroy sensitive electronics. The critical distinction is that EMP does not destroy through kinetic impact or explosive force. It destroys through electromagnetic physics that cannot be intercepted by traditional missile defense. The Iranian test conducted 72 hours ago involved a high-altitude detonation at approximately 40 kilometers above the Persian Gulf. Intelligence assessments that reached Western defense ministries indicate the device generated an electromagnetic field strength of 50,000 volts per meter at ground level within a 200-kilometer radius. To understand what this means, consumer electronics typically fail at field strengths exceeding 1,000 volts per meter. Military-hardened systems are designed to withstand up to 10,000 volts per meter. What Iran demonstrated was 5 times beyond military hardening standards. Here is what you need to understand about the test parameters. The detonation altitude of 40 kilometers places the weapon above the effective range of all Israeli air defense systems. Iron Dome engages targets between 0 and 15 kilometers altitude. David's sling covers 15 to 40 kilometers. Arrow 3 is designed for exoatmospheric interception above 80 kilometers. There is a gap, and Iran just demonstrated that they know exactly where that gap exists. The device itself weighs approximately 800 kilograms and can be delivered by Iran's K-bar-Shikan medium-range ballistic missile, which has a range of 1,450 kilometers. Flight time from Iranian territory to optimal detonation position above central Israel is approximately 7 minutes. The electromagnetic pulse propagates at light speed, meaning the time between detonation and infrastructure impact is effectively instantaneous. Let me give you specific numbers on what this means for Israeli infrastructure. Israel's electrical grid operates on a centralized architecture with 8 major transformer substations. These substations contain large power transformers, each weighing between 100 and 400 tons and requiring 18 to 24 months to manufacture and replace. An EMP strike would simultaneously destroy the semiconductor components in these transformers across the entire affected radius. The transformers cannot be repaired. They must be completely replaced. Israel's communications infrastructure relies on cellular networks, satellite ground stations, and fiber optic repeaters, all of which contain vulnerable electronic components. Military command and control systems, while more heavily shielded, still depend on commercial electrical grid for primary power and commercial communications networks for redundancy. The Israeli Defense Forces have hardened bunkers and backup systems, but the question is not whether they have some protected capability. The question is whether they can conduct coordinated military operations when 90% of their communications architecture is non-functional. The economic implications are genuinely staggering. Israel's GDP is $520 billion annually. Modern economic activity is entirely dependent on electrical power and digital communications. If you eliminate electrical infrastructure for 60 to 90 days, which is the minimum timeline for partial restoration after transformer destruction, you are looking at economic losses exceeding $150 billion, or roughly 30% of annual GDP. This does not account for permanent capital flight, which would accelerate dramatically as businesses and wealthy individuals recognize the vulnerability. Section 2, Strategic Implications, the Obsolescence of Deterrence. Now that we understand the technical capability, we need to examine what this means for the entire strategic framework that has governed Middle Eastern military dynamics for the past 50 years. Israel's security doctrine since 1973 has been built on two pillars: technological superiority and strategic depth through rapid offensive capability. The assumption has been that Israel could use superior technology to defend against incoming threats while maintaining the option to launch devastating counterstrikes that would deter adversaries from escalating beyond conventional boundaries. This doctrine worked when the technological gap was sufficiently large and when threats came in forms that Iron Dome and Arrow could intercept. The EMP capability breaks this model completely. Let me walk through the game theory logic step by step, because this is where the structural analysis becomes genuinely disturbing. In a conventional conflict, Israel launches airstrikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or military infrastructure. Iran responds with ballistic missile salvos. Iron Dome and David's sling intercept most incoming missiles. Some get through and cause localized damage. Israel conducts additional strikes, and the conflict eventually de-escalates through diplomatic intervention or mutual exhaustion. Both sides remain functional throughout. Both sides retain deterrence capability. Neither side faces existential threat from conventional exchange. Now consider the EMP scenario. Iran launches 10 ballistic missiles toward Israel. 8 are decoys. 2 carry EMP devices. Israeli air defense must choose which missiles to prioritize with limited interceptor inventory. Even if they successfully intercept both EMP-carrying missiles, they have depleted interceptor stocks. If even one EMP device reaches detonation altitude, Israel's entire defensive architecture goes offline simultaneously. No Iron Dome, no David Sling, no air defense network, no radar, no communications. At this point, Iran can launch conventional ballistic missiles at will against an adversary with no remaining interception capability. But more significantly, Israel cannot mount effective military response because the systems required to coordinate air operations, direct ground forces, and maintain command continuity are all dependent on the electrical and communications infrastructure that no longer functions. This is what military strategists call a first strike advantage. Whoever employs the EMP capability first gains decisive advantage because the opponent loses the ability to mount coordinated response. This inverts the entire deterrence logic. Previously, both sides knew that any major attack would trigger devastating retaliation, creating mutual incentive for restraint. Now, the side that strikes first with EMP eliminates the opponent's retaliation capability, creating incentive for preemptive action during crisis. Let me be very direct about what this means. If Iran believes Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran now has overwhelming incentive to launch EMP strike before Israel can execute their operation. The old calculus where Iran would absorb the first strike and respond with conventional missile barrage no longer applies when Iran can instead eliminate Israel's entire defensive and offensive capability in the opening minutes of conflict. The United States enters this equation, but the dynamics are not reassuring. American military assets in the region include carrier strike groups, air bases in Qatar and Bahrain, and intelligence facilities throughout the Gulf. These assets are also vulnerable to EMP attack. Hardening standards exist, but were designed for Cold War nuclear EMP scenarios, not optimized devices specifically engineered to maximize electromagnetic effect. If Iran can neutralize Israeli defenses and damage American regional capability simultaneously, the timeline for effective American intervention extends dramatically. Section 3, Historical Patterns, the technology that erases technology advantages. Let me put this in historical context because what we are witnessing is not unprecedented. Throughout military history, there are moments when a new technology or tactical innovation renders previous advantages obsolete and forces complete strategic recalibration. The English longbow in the 14th century nullified the mounted knight advantage that had dominated European warfare for 3 centuries. A peasant with 6 months of training could kill a nobleman who had spent a lifetime preparing for mounted combat and wore armor costing the equivalent of a small village. The entire feudal military structure became obsolete within a generation. The machine gun in the First World War eliminated the offensive infantry tactics that had worked for centuries. Mass charges that could overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers instead produced casualties measured in hundreds of thousands for territorial gains measured in meters. The armies that adapted to this new reality survived. The armies that continued 19th century tactics were destroyed. Nuclear weapons in 1945 made conventional military superiority largely irrelevant between major powers. The United States could field the most advanced tanks, the most capable aircraft, and the largest navy in human history, but this conventional dominance meant nothing if the Soviet Union could destroy American cities with thermonuclear weapons. The entire logic of great power conflict had to be rebuilt around deterrence rather than victory. What Iran has demonstrated is the current era's equivalent. Israel has spent decades building qualitative military edge through advanced aircraft, sophisticated missile defense, and superior intelligence systems. This edge has been decisive in every conflict since 1967, but electromagnetic pulse technology makes the sophisticated electronics that enable this edge into a vulnerability rather than a strength. The more technologically advanced your military, the more dependent you are on electronics, the more vulnerable you become to EMP attack. This is the deep historical irony. The technological sophistication that gave Israel overwhelming advantage against Syria, Egypt, and Iraq in conventional warfare creates systemic vulnerability against an adversary that can eliminate electronics across an entire theater with a single weapon. The country with 19th century electrical infrastructure suffers far less from EMP than the country with completely digitized smart grid and network-centric warfare doctrine. There is a reason Iran pursued this capability rather than trying to match Israeli Air Force jet for jet or building equivalent missile defense systems. They understood that technological competition on Israel's chosen battlefield was a losing proposition. So they changed the battlefield to one where their adversaries' strengths become weaknesses. Every empire that relied on technological superiority eventually encountered an adversary that found the gap in the armor. Rome's legions were invincible in set-piece battle, but vulnerable to sustained guerrilla warfare by Germanic tribes. The Spanish Armada represented the most powerful naval force ever assembled, but was destroyed by smaller English ships using superior tactics in home waters. Nazi Germany's technically superior tanks and aircraft were overwhelmed by Soviet mass production and American industrial capacity. Israel is facing that moment now. The question is whether they recognize it in time to adapt. Section 4, Scenario Development, the Logic of Preemptive Escalation. Let me walk through the scenario logic that should terrify every strategic planner in Tel Aviv and Washington right now. Scenario 1, Iran moves toward nuclear weapons threshold. This has been the nightmare scenario for Israeli defense planning for 20 years. Israel's declared red line is Iranian nuclear capability, with the implicit understanding that Israel would launch military strikes to prevent Iranian weapons acquisition, regardless of international opposition. Under the old strategic framework, Israel could execute this strike with reasonable confidence. Israeli F-35 fighters would penetrate Iranian airspace, deliver precision weapons against nuclear facilities, and withdraw before Iranian air defense could mount effective response. Iran would retaliate with ballistic missiles. Iron Dome would intercept most of them. Some damage would occur in Israeli cities. International pressure would force ceasefire, and Iran's nuclear program would be set back 5 to 10 years. That calculation no longer holds. If Israel prepares major strike package against Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran detects the preparation through intelligence monitoring. Iran now knows they have EMP capability that can eliminate Israeli air defense and communications before Israeli aircraft even take off. The rational Iranian response is to launch EMP strike immediately, destroying Israel's ability to execute the planned operation while opening the door for follow-on conventional missile attacks against an adversary with no remaining interception capability. Israel knows Iran knows this, so Israel's calculation shifts toward launching first before Iran can employ EMP. But Iran knows Israel might reach this conclusion, creating incentive for Iran to strike preemptively before Israel can preempt them. This is what game theorists call a stability-instability paradox. The side that strikes first gains overwhelming advantage, therefore both sides have incentive to strike first, therefore crisis stability collapses completely. Scenario 2, Regional conflict escalation through proxy forces. Hezbollah launches major rocket barrage from Lebanon. Israel responds with ground incursion into southern Lebanon. Iran provides support to Hezbollah through weapons transfers and intelligence sharing. Israel strikes Iranian weapons convoys in Syria. Escalation ladder proceeds step by step toward direct Israeli-Iranian confrontation. At any point in this escalation ladder, Iran can employ EMP capability to fundamentally shift the strategic balance. Israel bombs Damascus warehouse containing Iranian missiles. Iran responds not with conventional retaliation, but with EMP strike that eliminates Israeli air defense network. Suddenly, Israel faces Hezbollah rocket fire with no Iron Dome, faces Iranian ballistic missiles with no interception capability, and faces potential Syrian military intervention without the command and control systems necessary to coordinate multi-front defense. The existence of the EMP option changes Iranian risk tolerance throughout the escalation ladder. Previously, Iran had to carefully calibrate their support for Hezbollah to avoid triggering Israeli strikes that Iran could not effectively counter. Now Iran can support Hezbollah more aggressively, knowing they possess the capability to neutralize Israeli military superiority if conflict escalates beyond acceptable bounds. Scenario 3, American military intervention. Israel faces existential threat from combined Iranian, Hezbollah, and Syrian forces. The United States intervenes with air power and naval strikes against Iranian military infrastructure. Iran responds with EMP strikes against American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, simultaneously with strikes against Israeli infrastructure. American carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf are partially hardened against EMP, but were not designed to operate in completely non-permissive electromagnetic environment. Aircraft can still fly, but the data links, radar systems, and communications networks that enable coordinated modern warfare are degraded or destroyed. American forces can still fight, but they fight as individual platforms rather than networked kill chain. Combat effectiveness drops by an estimated 60 to 70%. The time required to restore communications, rebuild networks, and reestablish command and control extends American timeline for effective regional dominance from days to weeks or months. During this window, Iran has free hand to pursue objectives, including Strait of Hormuz closure, attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure, and potential ground operations against weakened adversaries. I want to be very clear about probability assessment here. I am not saying these scenarios will definitely occur. I am saying the existence of validated Iranian EMP capability makes these scenarios far more likely than they were 96 hours ago. The incentive structures have shifted, the crisis stability has degraded, the margin for miscalculation has narrowed dramatically. Section 5, Systemic Implications, the Petrodollar End Game. Let me take this analysis one level deeper because the EMP capability connects to forces much larger than Israeli-Iranian military balance. The United States dollar serves as global reserve currency because oil is priced in dollars. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states sell oil exclusively in dollars, creating permanent demand for American currency regardless of American economic fundamentals. This petrodollar system allows the United States to run trillion-dollar deficits, maintain global military presence, and export inflation to the rest of the world. The system works as long as Gulf oil flows freely and prices remain denominated in dollars. Iranian EMP capability threatens this entire structure. If Iran can neutralize American military assets in the Gulf with electromagnetic attack, if Iran can close Strait of Hormuz without facing immediate American military response, if Iran can demonstrate that American security guarantees to Gulf monarchies are no longer credible, then the fundamental bargain underlying the petrodollar system breaks down. Saudi Arabia and UAE have already been diversifying their currency reserves and exploring oil sales in yuan to China. They have been doing this slowly and carefully to avoid triggering American retaliation. But if America demonstrates inability to protect Gulf allies against Iranian EMP threat, the incentive for rapid diversification increases dramatically. Why maintain exclusive dollar pricing when the security guarantee backing that arrangement is no longer credible? The moment Gulf states begin accepting yuan, euro, or gold for oil sales, demand for dollars decreases. American bond yields increase. Debt service costs explode. The federal government faces choice between massive spending cuts or hyperinflationary money printing. Either choice triggers economic crisis that makes 2008 look like a minor correction. This is not speculation. This is structural analysis of interconnected systems where military capability shifts create cascade effects through economic and monetary arrangements. The EMP test that occurred 3 nights ago is not just about Israeli air defense. It is about whether American military primacy in the most strategically critical region on Earth remains credible. China is watching this very carefully. If the United States cannot maintain credible deterrence against Iran, what does that signal about American capability to defend Taiwan against Chinese invasion? If American carrier strike groups are vulnerable to EMP attack in the Persian Gulf, are they equally vulnerable in the South China Sea? The answers to these questions will determine whether we are watching the beginning of American imperial decline or merely a tactical setback that can be managed through adaptation. Closing synthesis. Let me synthesize what we have covered tonight and what it means going forward. Iran has successfully tested an electromagnetic pulse weapon capable of destroying electrical infrastructure and communications networks across a radius of 200 kilometers. The test parameters indicate the weapon can be delivered by existing Iranian ballistic missiles and detonated above the effective ceiling of Israeli air defense systems. The technology is validated. The capability is real. This capability fundamentally alters the strategic balance in the Middle East by eliminating Israel's defensive advantage and creating first strike incentives that destabilize crisis management. The existence of EMP technology makes conventional escalation ladders far more dangerous because either side might choose to employ electromagnetic attack rather than accept unfavorable conventional outcome. The broader implications extend beyond Israeli-Iranian military balance to questions about American security guarantees, Gulf state confidence in dollar system, and global perceptions of American military primacy. The cascading effects through economic and monetary systems could be severe if conflict escalates to actual EMP employment. I want to acknowledge very directly that I might be wrong about some of these assessments. The intelligence regarding the test is not fully confirmed through independent sources. The claim specifications might be exaggerated. The Iranian capability might be less robust than initial reports suggest. If I am wrong, we will come back and analyze exactly why the assessment was incorrect and what that teaches us about intelligence evaluation and strategic analysis. But I am confident in the structural logic. Even if this specific test is less significant than reported, the technology exists, Iran has been pursuing it, and the strategic implications I have outlined apply whenever this capability becomes operational. The timeline might be different. The specific technical parameters might vary, but the fundamental dynamics remain. The most important thing you can do is not simply accept this analysis, but test it against evidence as events develop. Watch how Israel adjusts their defense posture. Watch whether American military deployments to the region increase or shift toward more distributed, hardened configurations. Watch whether Gulf states begin signaling reduced confidence in American security guarantees through their economic and diplomatic choices. This is not prophecy. This is structural analysis using game theory, historical pattern recognition, and systems thinking. The framework can be wrong if the assumptions are wrong or if unexpected variables enter the equation. Your job is to evaluate whether the framework fits the evidence, not to accept it uncritically. We are watching a historical inflection point. The rules that govern Middle Eastern conflict for 50 years are being rewritten by technological change that makes previous advantages obsolete. How Israel, the United States, and Iran navigate this transition will determine whether we are heading toward catastrophic war or painful but managed strategic adjustment. I will continue analyzing these developments as they unfold, applying the same framework and acknowledging when predictions fail to materialize. The truth, however uncomfortable, remains the only thing worth pursuing.